Hi, everybody. Just wanted to start by saying thank you for registering for today's event to talk all things mental health and the workplace. So let me start by also saying thank you to University of Canberra and their team for putting mental health on the agenda and being able to spend some time with you today. And it is an absolute privilege for me to be able to share with you a topic that's very close to my heart. So what we're going to go through today, just on our agenda, I'm going to start by just a very quick overview of who I am. I'm then going to take you through the state of play of where mental health and mental illness is at both globally and then here in Australia. And then I'm going to talk all about mental health in the workplace. So I'm going to talk about the drivers of how the external business environment impacts the mental health and well-being of staff. I'm also going to go through what's called psychosocial risk factors, and I'll explain more of that later. And then absolutely to talk about leadership and line managers' roles in managing the mental health and well-being of staff, and also what the modern workplace and what the modern employee looks like. And it will all be from a technology perspective and things that we can expect coming up over the horizon and how that can impact the mental health and well-being of staff. And I then wanted to take the opportunity to show and talk you through some best practice examples of what companies are doing globally. So some of what Volkswagen's doing, what Johnson & Johnson's doing as well, and Unilever. At the end, I'm just going to provide a very brief overview of my current PhD research in this space, and then absolutely the opportunity for you guys to ask me some questions. So I'm going to do my best to run to about 40 minutes so that we've got ample time for questions as well. Now, as a management consultant for 15 years, I fundamentally believe that there should be no more than 3 dot points on any PowerPoint presentation slide deck per page. But I'm absolutely breaking that cardinal rule today. And some of these slides, just to give you the heads up, they are a little text heavy. The reason for that is because I've asked University of Canberra if you are interested to have these slides to take away. There's a lot of stuff there at the end that you may be interested in reading more about, and also passing that on to other people that you may think it's useful. So I'm just going to switch my webcam off now and go straight to slides, and then I'll flick it back on at the end. Okay, so just very briefly, who am I? So as I said earlier, I've been a management consultant for the last 15 years of my career, mainly working in the Big Four. And my areas of expertise is predominantly around strategic financial management and digital transformation across public and private, and now also as a director with EY in advisory, splitting between future of work, workplace mental health, and still a little bit of digital transformation. As an academic, I have started my PhD research, which focuses on what interventions that organisations can take to, one, protect the mental health of their people, and two, what can they do to better manage those with a mental illness. So that's a little bit about me. Okay, so what I wanted to do was actually start with what is the universal definition of mental health, because everyone's got a slightly different understanding of it. So this is what the World Health Organization has put forward, that it is a state of well-being in which every individual realises their potential, that they can cope with the normal stresses of life and can work productively and fruitfully, and that you can able to contribute to their own community. So now I'm going to put forward as well, though, what the concept of, or the definition of mental illness. And this has been put forward by the Department of Health here in Australia. And it's a health problem that significantly affects how a person feels, thinks, behaves, and interacts with other people. And probably another key word there is that it's clinically diagnosed according to standardised criteria. So let's get into the state of play. This is to give you context around, as I said, at a global level and a national level. But why is positive mental health so important? Firstly, it's better for our economy. It improves our labour force participation and productivity.
Right.
Hi, everyone. Yeah?
Keep going.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Perfect. So apologies for that, guys. We just had a slight technology problem there. So I'm just going to jump into the next slide. So apologies again for that. So as I said, I wanted to go through and give you context of the state of play of mental illness at the moment. And if I look at it from a global economic perspective, right now, 10% of the population is affected by a mental illness. And that figure has grown between 2005 and 2015. Depression grew by almost 20%, and anxiety grew by nearly 14.9%. And the World Health Organization attributes some of that increase into not only global sort of population growth, but also that we've got an aging population as well. Right now, though, depression is the highest contributor to non-fatal health loss, and anxiety is the sixth. And unfortunately now, suicide is the leading cause of death among 15 to 29-year-olds in the United States. If I go on to the next piece there, the bottom of that global economic impact, in 2010, mental illness was costing our global economy $2.5 trillion. By 2030, that will grow to $6.1 trillion. And the key driver where will cost businesses. So the key driver there is lost productivity in the workplace, and that will almost double in 2030 to $4.11 trillion. And even though you can see the size of this problem, government expenditure in mental health is still relatively low. In low-income countries, governments spend 1% of their budget. High-income countries, it's 5%. And in Australia, we're slightly ahead of that at 7.7%. However, the World Health Organization has proven that for every dollar invested in trying to improve mental health, you get that 4-to-1 ROI. So the absolute business case is there for investment. And if I now look at it, what's the impact to the workplace? And here are some figures. So in the United Kingdom last year, absenteeism cost businesses nearly $8 billion, and presenteeism was $26.4 billion. And that is the key cost of mental illness in all workplaces. In China last year, their population currently sits at 1.4 billion, and mental illness of their people sits at around 100 million. And they did a study last year, which was really interesting, of the top 50 companies across China. And their employees reported that close to 80% feel signs of agitation, 60% of anxiety, and 38.6% of depression. And when I go out and talk to organisations, it's about actually saying that the problem actually is real and it is live in the workplace. And I'll talk about those figures in Australia in a moment. And I found in Spain it was really interesting that between 11 to 20% of mental disorders are attributed to poor working conditions. And that's costing them up to $372 billion a year. And even in Denmark, they've got approximately 35,000 employees are on sick leave any given day due to work-related psychological distress. So now let's talk about it from an Australian perspective. So the National Mental Health Commission and KPMG did a report last year, and it currently costs the Australian economy $60 billion per year, which is equivalent to nearly 4% of our GDP, or equivalent to $4,000 for every taxpayer. The impact of mental ill health has reduced our labour market productivity, and it's about 4%, you can see there, for mild depression, and then more than double for severe depression. So what is our federal government doing about it? Last year it was great to see that they have invested $9 billion in mental health in our budgets, which equates to 7.4%, as I said. And as you can see, it has been increasing. It's now up another $6 billion, and I expect that investment to grow in the next couple of years as well. But let's talk about the social impact. I think it's relatively known now that 1 in 5 Australians experience a mental illness, and 45% at some point in their life. Those figures are from the Australian Bureau of Stats. Whereas in 2015, the Department of Health reported that a further 23% of Australians have signs and symptoms of mental illness that are only falling short of a formal diagnosis. And what I haven't put up there, which is interesting, is that 1 in 3 women will visit the GP for discussion around their mental health versus 1 in 6 men. So if I now look at the next piece, the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare last year reported that 4.2 million Australians received a mental health related prescription. And in that year, 33.7 million prescriptions were dispensed. So that was on average just over 9 prescriptions per person per year. And I again make the point that mental illness is real and it does exist in our organisations and in our society. In Australia, there are 9 deaths by suicide every day and another 63,000 attempt suicide every year. So what does that mean for Australian workplaces? So again, you can see there that the key driver is presenteeism, which is just under $10 billion. When employees go through the process of mental health related compensation, you can see the percentage splits there, the highest one being reacted to stresses in the workplace and anxiety disorder. But the main causes of each of those claims is predominantly work pressure, harassment and bullying, which still exists in our organisations, and exposure to violence as well. So this is now the workplace impact, and this is what employees are saying. And these figures these were reported in 2018 by an organisation called Superfriend. And 3 in 5 employees experience a mental or behavioural condition. Only 5 in 10 believe that their most senior leader values mental health. 50% of employees believe that mental health is a large problem in their organisation, and only 15% believe that their most senior leaders are seen to proactively encourage and promote good mental health. And what's probably more disappointing that leaders and organisations need to address is that last year 2 in 5 employees actually left their job because of a poor workplace mental health environment. So not only does it impact on the employee, but it also impacts then on the teams and the organisation as well. Teams in terms of new recruitment, they're picking up the additional workload of someone leaving and the cost to business of that, and obviously the cultural impact across the organisation as well. So now what I'm going to do is just hit into section 3, which is all around mental health in the workplace. And I think that I'm going to start with this table because I think it's really, really interesting. And this comes from the US, from a professor called Dr. John Quelch, who I was fortunate enough to interview a few weeks ago. He's identified what are the key sources of stress in the workplace. And as you can see there, employers have put a ranking on which they believe are the top stresses. And I'll go through those first 5, and then I'm going to show you what employees believe are their top stresses. So it's probably no surprise that work-life balance, inadequate staffing, the blurring of the lines between technology, inside and outside work hours, an excessive amount of continued org change, and also concerns about their personal financial situations. So on this next slide now, let's have a look at what employees feel are their top stresses, and I'll go through those 5. So lack of work-life balance was what employers thought was the top stressor, whereas employees felt that it was inadequate staffing. Employees thought that was number 2, whereas for employees, they think that low pay is their second biggest stressor. Technologies was 3, whereas employees rated company culture as that driver. Excessive amount of org change, employers rated 4, whereas there was unclear and conflicting job expectations for employees. And then concerns about personal finances was for employers at 5, whereas it was excessive amount of org change. And I wanted to bring that up because in those, there is absolutely a disconnect between what employees think are stresses in the workplace and then what employees think. And so we need to be able to bridge that gap if we're going to address it collectively, and also address and put in place the right initiatives as well. And it just comes down to better communication in the workplace. So these are some of the key drivers. These are all really proven in research now. And as I said earlier, in the agenda section, I want to briefly talk about the external environment, psychosocial factors. I'm not going to address culture of the workplace and pace of change in this discussion, just simply because of time. But then I think most importantly, leadership. And then, as I said, what's coming up over the horizon in terms of a new workplace and a new employee. So if I have a look at the external business environment now, some of the key drivers, and as I said, these are proven to reduce the psychological health and well-being of staff. And it has absolutely centres around globalisation, a fluctuating economy and job security, technology, which I'll talk about later, constant rapid change, and also our current geopolitical environment as well. So, sorry, I'll just go back one slide. Apologies for that. So when I look at globalisation, I think we can all agree that over the last decade, in particular, the global financial crisis, that had a major role in changing how businesses operate. So many organisations reduced their employee profiles from full-time to temporary work hours. And what that actually does is it also then leads to increased job insecurity. And that has been found to adversely affect employee psychological well-being. And it's not only for the people that have lost their jobs, but there's actually greater anxiety and insecurity for the employees that remain, that still fear that they may be losing their jobs. And that's where it comes down to how leaders and managers manage when they're doing redundancies, when they're changing employee profiles and things like that, that the communication and change management of that absolutely needs to be right on point to reduce the stress and pressure, particularly of employees that are still in the organisation. And it's also then that they're picking up the enhanced workloads. In terms of rapid economic change, we absolutely know that that's intensified. Lots of mergers and acquisitions and things like that. And while that brings opportunities for business growth and new ways of working, it still has a huge impact on employee health and well-being once it hits the business internally as well. And I'm just going to, for time, I'm going to just skip over the rest, and I'll send those other key points out to you, because the ones that I really did want to focus on was psychosocial risk factors, and these have been studied for quite a long time now in research, and there's three key ones. And so the first one is job demand and control. So that's the psychological demands of the job, but then the decision latitude or job control that the employee has to actually manage those and their autonomy in that. The tipping point of when it becomes psychological distress for the employee is when those demands require sustained effort and the worker's ability to control their own activities and be able to make decisions. So when I look at job demand and control, and if I look at it in particular from a public sector perspective, it can be very difficult for leaders to at times control the pace of the organisation when you've got very quick policy on the run decisions, or you've got ministers requiring things at the last minute. But leaders can set the pace of the organisation to some degree. And we need to, as leaders and line managers, really be aware of the demands that we are placing on staff and actually asking ourselves the question, is this particular activity going to be right for the employee that I'm delegating it to? Is this going to cause them more stress? Is it going to cause the team more stress? How can we do this differently? Effort, reward and imbalance model. This is probably no surprises that employee strain surfaces when rewards don't match the effort made. I think what we need to do as organisations is get better at changing how we actually do reward people, and that salary is only just one component. And I think we've got to place equal, if not more, emphasis on respect and support of those employees. It can be other different types of promotion opportunities, not just in level, but also providing them with job security and their ability to choose whether they want to overcommit at this point in time and their need for control. The tipping point here is that it may be different for every person in your team. Everyone's tipping point on how they handle stress, the amount of resilience that they have can be different. And that's why it's incredibly important that we know our staff well and we know what drives them, so we can be able to better manage them. And obviously, social support and socio-integration between supervisors, co-workers and employees. We all know that the majority of people leave their jobs because of their manager. The tipping point is, does that employee feel they're in a place of low supportiveness? They've got really poor quality communication, and there's a lack of feedback and organisation. So there's 4 proven effective social support activities that employers and managers can do. There's emotional support. And what I mean by that is showing empathy to your employees. There's instrumental, which means that are you giving your employees task-specific help? Informational support. And that's been, are you making your employees aware of what's happening in the organisation? Are you providing advice and the right directives to them? And there's also appraisal support, which is about feedback. It's about suggestions, positive encouragement, and of course, constructive feedback as well. Psychosocial risk factors, I believe, are hygiene factors in an organisation that we have to get right to facilitate an environment of a mentally healthy workplace. As I said, these are well proven. A few years ago, there was a meta-analytical review, a big research review of 75,000 employees across the globe, and the findings were that there were robust and consistent links between a poor environment in these factors and the risk that employees will exacerbate their mental health disorder. So let's get on to leadership now. I think it's no surprises of the important role that leaders play to advance and facilitate better mental health and well-being in the workplace. I believe they have absolute direct control. They not only have responsibility, but they also have the legislative responsibility in terms of the workplace health and safety environment. World Health Organization, again, walks through a series, and I can send you this later post this discussion, around what are the risk and protective factors for mental health. And it's, again, no surprises that positive leadership, which is part of work culture, influences the environment in how people are supported by mental health. And again, it's no surprise that negative leadership styles adversely impact not only mental health, but physical health and unsupportive managers. So I'm going to talk now a little bit about, there's a study done across the UK and the US military, and that better leadership results in greater unit cohesion, which was then directly linked to better mental health of soldiers. So we've really got to focus on our leadership training and development when it comes to building a psychologically safe workplace. And we've got to be able to give an even balance of technical capability of employees with their emotional, psychological capabilities as well. Other studies have shown that the role and the pivotal role that leaders can play, and in particular to prevent mental health and well-being. I think most organisations, we're still in a reactive state of when the employee is already in a state of mental illness, and we need to get better at what does prevention look like for our workplace. And there is growing evidence that different leadership styles actually do affect mental health and well-being and recovery. And the one that's been spoken about in the last decade has actually been transformational leadership behaviours. And they have been shown to have a positive effect on reducing mental illness among employees. And I will send you some literature on it, but very, very quickly, transformational leadership looks at idealised influence, your ability to have inspirational motivation on your staff. Are you giving them intellectual stimulation? And also individualised consideration as well. But there are reasons why leaders are not proactively managing mental health in the workplace. And this study was done nearly 15, 20 years ago, and it was identified that there are still uncertain boundaries into which they can operate. So what's the extent of what they need to do? They still feel uncomfortable and ill-equipped to effectively manage it. There's a lack of objective information about the disease and the treatment, the data to support why the workplace should invest. And what can a positive mental health environment bring? I wanted to show the study of 2002 because in 2017 in the UK, these were the top 5 challenges. And as you can see, in almost 15 years, there is no difference in what the challenges are for leaders, and we haven't been able to move the needle on getting leaders to care about this issue in the workplace. They still see it as a failure, not as a priority. It's still reactive rather than proactive. Again, there's a lack of insight around how it can improve performance, the evidence of why they should act, and the collective knowledge of best practice. Last year, I went out to 30 CEOs across Australia, and one of the findings was exactly the same as what it was in 2017 and 2002. I pulled out 3 key quotes of what some CEOs said. And in their organisation, they felt that there's still not enough respect that it's real, and people are scared at the corporate level to manage it. We need to have a mindset where we aren't scared. It's still not part of our core workforce strategy, and it still needs to matter at the top. We need to accept that it's a real issue. Again, these are good findings in the sense that it continues to give us a baseline on where we need to go. Now it's about overcoming what these barriers are and getting leaders to understand that now more than ever they need to act on this. I'm actually given time. I'm actually not going to go through these questions. Again, these handouts will be given to you, but what I've done is I've put together a series of questions as leaders and managers for you to reflect on and to ask yourself these questions and then to answer them and have a think about what you already are doing that's great, but what are the things that are missing that you can act on going forward. So there's a set there around leaders. There's 14 questions. And I'm very quickly going to talk about line managers because line managers make or break the mental health and well-being of everybody in the workplace. There was a study done in 2017 about what line managers need to enable them to act, to successfully do it, but what are their barriers? So the top 3 enablers was it needs to be integrated into org strategies and also into business plans. No surprises on senior leadership support, but also extensive communications regarding wellbeing programs. You'd be surprised at the disconnect between what leaders think everybody in the organisation knows about wellbeing and what they offer versus employees who don't know what initiatives exist. But what are their barriers to doing it well? We're not giving them the right tools and advice to undertake health assessment and monitoring. We're not giving adequate health training beyond the one-off session. We still need to improve on behavioural and competency skill development, which is very different to technical training. And also we need to still give specialised support in complex cases. Again, here is actually quite a number of questions here for leaders and managers. So I put together, there's about 22, and it's quite a lot. But I think that these are very good questions for you to really go away and think about and either discuss as peer groups or also discuss with your team as well. Very quickly, when we look at a new workplace and a new employee, we all know that we're living in an environment now where speed, complexity, uncertainty and ambiguity impacts on the workplace. We're in reactive modes constantly, but we're also being asked to adapt faster and with far less clarity, and that we're delivering on demand, but also that those can then actually all leads to lower productivity. And that leads to a culture of more stress in the workplace as well. But for a new employee, so the World Economic Forum every 2 years puts out the Future of Jobs report. They released their latest one in December 2018. And I wanted to highlight the key skills that employees needed back in last year. And you can see there's ones there around analytical thinking, problem solving, creativity, emotional intelligence, leadership and social influence. But in 4 years' time, when we look ahead, each of those skills, except for new ones that have come in, is technology design and programming, and systems analysis and evaluation. So what dropped off the list there was attention to detail and coordination and time management. But we're now in the 4th industrial revolution. We're in a knowledge economy now. Every single one of these skills, more now than ever, requires high levels of cognitive health and brain functioning and performance. So cognitive impairment, particularly from mental illness, is unbelievably damaging not only to the employee but to the organisation, where we are relying more on our minds than our hands, which puts us in constant contact with others and how we communicate and how we engage with them. But it also means that as a workplace, we do need to put mental health at the top of our agenda. So I'm going to very quickly focus on technology. and what that always-on culture looks like, and the risk and the opportunity that it presents to the workplace. And I thought you might find some of these stats really interesting. In 2015, 64% of American adults, including 85% of young adults, reported owning a smartphone. 46% of those reported they couldn't live without one. When the Apple iPhone was introduced between 2007 to 2010, that smartphone penetration reached nearly 40%. Right now, though, the average smartphone user checks their phone every 6 minutes or more than 150 times a day, which is absolutely huge. What that also leads to is our pressure to remain connected, and that we're expected to be available and responsive both professionally and personally. What that does is it's rising stress levels in the workplace and the pressure to respond even if a response isn't required, particularly when it comes to emails. So I'm going to talk about what impact this has on our cognitive health, but I've also pulled out the impact for millennials and adolescents, and adolescents in particular, not only as parents on this call that may be interested for their children, but they are our future workforce, and what impact this also has on work-life balance. It's been proven that smartphone use, it does decrease neural stimulation, and it leads to people shortchanging and being able to develop in-person relationships. People that smartphone users generally sleep less, which then impacts decreasing productivity in the workplace. I think we all know that new technologies to some degree contribute to heightened anxiety and short attention spans. And social media also fragments thought and also inhibits individual thinking and our individual creative processes as well. I think this is really important for millennials. And there was one study where 51% of respondents between the ages of 21 to 30 thought it was socially acceptable to check texts and emails in a meeting, compared to just 16% of respondents between 51 to 65. What we do need to do now, and it's starting to happen a little bit in the US and the UK, is actually there are policies that we need to start to put in place, particularly around email use and what that looks like. For adolescents though, and again I say this, our future workforce, is that the increasing use of smartphones by children actually does impact on brain development and social norms. And there is a new concept around screen sabbaticals that's getting attention. Young people that are growing up surrounded by smartphone technology are becoming less comfortable with in-person and telephone conversations. And it's also linked to lower levels of empathy and emotions. And when you look at this and you look at the skills that are required, empathy, being able to communicate with people, they're critical skills that we need in the workplace. Work-life balance. I think we all know that we have absolutely blurred the lines between employment and life demands. Employees are attached to their phones day and night. Most of us check out emails outside of work hours. And I think maybe more so for parents, once they've taken care of children and family responsibilities, they go back on emails in the early evening, and it's kind of called the third work shift of the day. But also, even though there's the flip side that employees think that I'm still checking in on family and friends at work, it still actually does distract from the job, and it does consume that valuable work time. You can then be bringing in external stresses into the workplace, but then you're also bringing them home to work if you're then doing work at home as well. And that just contributes to tensions, and due to that always kind of on culture. But I do want to say that it's not all bad. Technology has and will continue to improve people's overall quality of life. Organisations still believe that technology has made them more dynamic and innovative, better at communicating and being more cohesive, and also being more open. What we need to do again is understand the level of acceptable use of technology in the workplace. And I go back to that table on slide 17. What impact is technology having on psychological stress in our workplace? And then we need to start to address the impact of those. Again, here are some key reflection points for you to go away and think about. And very quickly, I'm going to talk about better practice so I can leave 15 minutes for questions at the end. But I wanted to show you what some companies are doing. Some of you may be aware that a few years ago, France actually legislated what they call the right to disconnect. Any company with more than 50 employees had to establish rules around when staff were allowed to send and answer emails. The goal there was to ensure that they weren't doing unpaid work and were guaranteed private time, and they are not to be contacted while on leave. And I personally think that's absolutely brilliant. Volkswagen and Daimler. Volkswagen have actually configured their email servers so that emails can only be sent to employees half an hour before the start of the day and half an hour at the end of the working day, and never on weekends. Daimler also introduced a similar policy where they actually switch off employee access to emails during holidays. And I think these are absolutely brilliant. And I come back to my earlier point around job demand and control. And if we don't give employees adequate time to recover outside of work hours, Johnson & Johnson, I actually believe, is one of the #1 companies globally who is really managing mental health at its absolute best. They have a company goal of creating the world's healthiest workforce by 2020, and they are absolutely well and truly on their way there. And I'll let you read through some of those things later, but they also do very good online mental health screenings. They have a performance institute that all employees go through where they can better learn about stress, energy management, broader health and well-being like cancer awareness and things like that. Unilever introduced a mental health strategy in 2015, and that was really around leadership and management, looking at their communication and culture, resilience, and also support. They've delivered resources and company communications. In Brazil, they're actually trialling psychologists on site rather than EAP. What I like about Unilever, and if I look at the very last dot point there, their CEO said that whatever goes on for employees outside of work also goes on inside of work, and helping people manage that is just the right thing to do. And I believe that every organisation has a corporate social responsibility and a moral responsibility to care and to act in this space. Very quickly, my PhD research is looking at what interventions can organisations take to protect employee mental health and better manage those with a mental illness. Last year, I went out to 30 CEOs and asked them the current state of mental health in their organisation and how they view their role as leaders and a bunch of other things. 2 weeks ago, I just got back from a 4-week trip overseas interviewing 25 subject matter experts all across the fields of neuroscience, psychiatry, business, stress and well-being. Amazing insights, which I can share over the coming weeks once I've sort of understood all the data. Later this year, I'll be getting 40 CEOs together in focus groups to challenge on what they actually will do in the workplace based on a series of interventions that I'm going to suggest. And then I'll design it and implement it. I've partnered with HCF to do this PhD research. I'll do it in their organisation, and with Swinburne and La Trobe University. And as I said, now with Ernst & Young, also helping our clients better manage workplace mental health. So that was very, very quick presentation. But I will open it up now, the opportunity for you guys to ask any questions that you would like to. So hopefully there are a few that come through. But what I will do, just while I'm waiting, if any do come through, is, as I said, I'll get the University of Canberra guys, if you are interested, to provide your email address, and that you can have these slides to take away with you as well. And if you do want me to expand on anything, or you do want to ask some questions post the session, please also don't hesitate to do so, and I'll get the guys to send through my contact details to you. Okay, so I've got a first question there on how to respond to managers and leaders who say they don't have time to put in place strategies to support employees collectively or at the individual level. So what I've been doing with leaders and managers is mental illness is very close to my heart, but when I talk to leaders and managers, I never go in with, unfortunately, the moral argument. I go in with purely the business argument, and it's talking about how it actually impacts their workplace from a financial perspective, a productivity perspective, and a cultural perspective. So getting them to respond is about creating the burning platform and the business case on why they need to do it, and also showing them some of the data, and hopefully from some of the organisation's employee surveys and engagement surveys, on why they actually need to start acting. So far, I've actually done 60 interviews for my PhD, and there's only been one CEO that said that they didn't want to participate. I think now more than ever, it's starting to get traction. But with leaders, you have to show them the hard data to be able to manage it. And that's how I've been responding to them, is creating the bridge to act. But please talk to me at the end to give some more detail, and I'll just jump on to the next one. So given the high rates of workplace bullying and the impact of a new employee on team environments, what are your thoughts around the impact of positive social connectedness in the workplace? I think the positive social connectedness in the workplace is important now more than ever, particularly for the reasons that I mentioned around technology. So technology at the moment has been proven to increase social isolation. And I think that we need to work better with leaders and managers to actually train them on how to create cohesive social connectedness in a modern workplace now. Every leader and manager, unfortunately, we still have workplace bullying and harassment, and we still haven't, I don't believe, got a zero tolerance policy to it. When I have been talking to leaders and managers in the space of mental health and a positively mental healthy environment, it is showing them the impact, the psychological impact that has, and then saying that the way to buffer that. And I also say that some mental health interventions are absolutely free. And I believe that a positive social work environment is free. Organisations, it is a core value, and it doesn't cost the organisation any money to live by its values and to have a better social supportive environment. So I personally don't get leaders and managers to get away on that one. But again, I'm happy to talk to you further about how to build that social connectedness in the workplace. And I will, in the next slide, flick you my email details as well, so that you can email me directly. It's one around, so what can I do if I feel my organisation mismanages mental health? It can be challenging sometimes, and I have heard this a lot, that how do we get traction with our leaders? And I think that what we've got to do is actually, as teams, come together. I think that line managers can break down the stigma and open up a conversation about how that team is managing mental health and well-being, and then continue to just push and push and push up the line about the importance of mental health and well-being. You know, I've had a lot of people write letters to me after I've given these conversations, and I anonymously take those examples and I go back to those leaders and say, here's what your employees are saying. This is why it's important for mental health. Also, it's just about building a business case. I don't think that anyone really knows how to build the right mental health business case. And again, very happy to send out to you all some links and some resources on what a mental health business case looks like. And like everything, you just need to push, 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 push. I say to people that get frustrated, you've got to look at where we came with things like race and things like AIDS and also things like marriage equality. It didn't happen overnight, but it's about, in a workplace, how do you build a coalition of support to continually push, push, push and make the organisation care? Are there legislative requirements to implement solutions in the workplace? It's not so much to, perhaps not quite the right word, solutions, but there are absolutely legislative requirements that the workplace must do, which is to, one, not only look out from an occupational health and safety perspective, and while it's not a solution, there are key pieces of legislation that organisations need to comply with. One is the Discrimination Act of Mental Health and Wellbeing, and also the Privacy Act of how organisations then deal with staff members and maintaining their privacy throughout that. And again, I'll flick you the link to what those legislative requirements are. But in terms of implementing solutions, no, unfortunately there aren't. Are there simple strategies that managers could be putting in place by way of intervention? There are, and some of those reflection questions that I gave you or that you will get in the slide deck will give you some insight into what simple strategies are. And if you also look back at the slides where I had the job demand control model, effort reward imbalance and social support, I'll further expand on that for you post this, but a lot of the things in there, line managers can do right now that will not cost you money to do, and that will have an impact on your team. I hope the webinar's been recorded. Yes, it is. And please do forward it on and absolutely with the slides. And as I said, I'll send you a bunch more information if you are interested. Managers who are quite narcissistic and don't believe that mental health is a thing, no matter how much they're told, have data to prove it or are displayed. How do you deal with these people? Look, one, that personality trait in general is quite, what to say about narcissists, hey? What you need to do, or what I do, is you just have to continually go on a journey with them, and you have to continually educate. However, what we do need to do, and what leaders absolutely need to do, is step up and say that we are embracing mental health. We are facilitating and supporting people with a mental illness. If you are not in line with that culture, if you are not in line with that values, that's when it's time to have a hard conversation, or that's when it's time to actually leave the organisation. When I did my 25 interviews overseas in the last few weeks, one of the key things that each of those CEOs and each of those leading academics said is, if you do not have the right leaders and managers that can support mental health and wellbeing in the workplace, they actually need to go. And I think that it sounds tough, but we need to take a hard line on it. And if they're not in line with those values, I do believe they need to leave the firm. But we've just got to, we've got to get tough on that. And that's up to leaders to do. Do you have a template for mental health strategy that workplaces can build on and implement? There are lots of templates available. I'm still formulating one that I particularly think is right, but I will give you some links to what other ones are that may start to help and jog your thinking. There's elements where there should be a broad strategy, but then every industry is different. And so a strategy for financial services will look very different to a strategy for an Australian government policy agency. So it'll be taking what's generic and then also then starting to think, how does that actually impact my industry, my organisation, the culture and values and leadership? And I think they're all the questions that are there. So, and I'm conscious that we are right on 1:30. So let me just again say that it was an absolute privilege to be able to speak with all of you for the last hour. And I hope that I've given you something to walk away with, or certainly something to think about. And the girls at UC will send you out some stuff. My email details are there, so please do not hesitate to email. And also just your broad feedback as well. Don't be shy. I'm very happy to hear it. So thank you very much, and it was an absolute pleasure.